started the recording of the webinar. So if you have to jump off early, or for all of those who may have missed today's webinar, you can certainly then get the recording. We'll send it out via email in a bit, and you can replay it, of course. Regarding questions, there is a questions box in your GoToWebinar control panel. So if you have any questions at all during the webinar, please use that box. Just send me the questions, and we'll have a couple of minutes at the end of the webinar to address those questions. Anything that I may not be able to answer, I'll certainly get to the questions. Anything that we don't get to because we run out of time, I'll get back to you as well. My name is Michael Kummer. I'm responsible for sales and marketing at Xiting in the US. And I'll tell you a little bit about the company first, who we are, and why we do what we do. Then we'll go into some of the challenges associated with role administration, role redesigns. We're going to look at how you can solve many of those issues, if not all, using tools that can automate many of the tasks that are otherwise very much manual and time-consuming. Then we'll do and I'm going to show you a couple of screenshots and sort of a demo on how that looks like from an administrator perspective. I'll show you who else has used our software to accomplish that, and obviously my contact information, and then we'll open it up to questions. So again, if you have any questions, please use that box most likely on your right, and you go to Webinar Control Panel, and I'll keep an eye out on those questions and either address them as I see them, if it's related to the context, what I'm talking about, or otherwise at the very end. All right, so about Xiting. Xiting was founded in 2008 in Switzerland, where we're still headquartered. The founding members are still with us and are all SAP security experts and consultants and trainers. We're about 50 employees right now, with offices in Germany, Switzerland, the United Kingdom, and the United States. Here in the US, we're based out of Tampa, Florida. And many of our senior consultants are also SAP trainers, so we still create and deliver training classes for SAP and through SAP. Just recently, we brought over a new training course, the Advanced SAP Authorizations, starting in March. So if you're interested in this very topic, I encourage you to go to training.sap.com and look for the Advanced SAP Authorizations class that we will deliver in partnership with SAP in Houston, Texas in March. I think it's March 12 and 13 or so, but it'll definitely show on trainingsap.com. Now let's jump right into some of the challenges associated with role administration. And I've just noticed, and nobody told me, that my screen wasn't sharing. So here you go. I hope you can see my screen now, and also my picture, or my video stream, that is. I apologize for that. Something wasn't, or I forgot to share. And actually my colleague told me and I didn't pay attention to the chat window. But anyway, so I hope everyone can see it now. You haven't really missed much except what I just talked about Xiting. But let's jump into the role administration challenges. And I'm sure you recognize some of those challenges. You may have gone through some of those yourself, but very often what we see is, and what we hear from customers is, that users are over-authorized. So they have more authorization than what they need, and it's very difficult to figure out exactly what they need and what you can take away from users. And that's especially true for RFC interfaces. In many cases, RFC interfaces only exist in a production landscape, so you don't really want to make quick changes to that because it may break the interface, and because of that, many companies just use SAP All for RFC interfaces because they're afraid to reduce the authorizations and break the interface in the process, potentially causing production issues or a standstill in a production line. Also analyzing your existing role concept and figuring out exactly what you're dealing with is very time-consuming and cumbersome. For example, just trying to figure out what roles have open authorizations or changed org fields or asterisk type of authorizations is very difficult. There is no easy way to simply get a report of all your roles that fit that criteria so you can fix that. And then designing new roles is often guesswork, and it puts a burden on the business very often because you, as a technical resource or a role administrator, you design a role concept as you think it should be, but then you have to go to the business and ask them for input, and they obviously then very often don't know what roles they need. They only know what they need to do to get their job done. So that's a very unreliable and time-consuming effort in designing a new role concept. And the same goes with testing. Testing new roles is very often associated with a certain risk, or at least a lot of effort, because you have to write test scripts and your testers have to go through those scripts, and if those test scripts are not accurate, if they don't reflect what users are really doing in the system, then you may be testing something that doesn't reflect real life. And testing is very cumbersome. If there is an authorization missing, the tester is stuck until the role admin fixes whatever needs to be fixed. And then when it comes to going live, there is also a risk associated with going live, because if your role concept isn't what it should be and you have missed authorizations your users need to do their job, then users get stuck, business gets impacted, and you lose time and money. So those are some, on a very high level, some of those areas that we have seen from our customers that pose a challenge to administrating, creating, maintaining, testing, and redesigning roles. And these areas are the ones that I would like to address one by one and tell you what you can do at each stage to either mitigate that issue, work around it, or to find a solution that can help you automate many of those tasks and make them more reliable. So before we jump into that, let's talk a little bit about reasons for a role optimization or role redesign project. And there are plenty of those, and I'm sure you've at least thought about some of those. One very hot topic right now is migration to S4 HANA. So as you know, S4 HANA comes with a changed data model. So you cannot simply take your legacy role concept and migrate it over to S4 HANA, because there are many transactions that don't exist anymore. Others have been consolidated. Very good example is a new transaction BP, business partners, that replaces many of the legacy transactions. So if you want to migrate to S4 HANA, you have to redesign your role concept, or you may upgrade your ERP system, or you may consolidate it. You know, if you have a lot of mergers and acquisitions, and at some point you may want to consolidate your various SAP landscapes into one, and that very often triggers a role redesign project, or you have SOD issues or changes in the organizational structure. So there are plenty of reasons why you may have to change, optimize, or redesign your role concept. And let us step through the common tasks involved in a typical quote-unquote role redesign project, if there is such a thing as a typical role redesign project. But very often you start out with importing or upgrading your SU25. So those are the proposals that SAP delivers to you that can help you make role creation more robust. So your SU25 upgrade results in a more robust SU24, your proposal database for SAP authorizations. So you very often do that first, or some customers don't do that at all, but we highly recommend it. Then you may run a trace analysis to see what transactions your users executed over the past maybe 3 months or so. And you can use ST03N data as an example to get a good understanding of what your users were actually doing in the system. And that helps with creating roles that are based on actual usage data versus, coming up with roles as you think they should be. And then, based on the trace analysis, very often you create a spreadsheet. And depending on the size of your SAP landscapes, number of users, number of roles, those can be very large spreadsheets with all your users and all the roles, and you connect them and try to make sense of who needs what. And because you as a role admin potentially don't necessarily always know exactly what users need, so you have to go to the business to keep business users maybe and verify and validate what you have created in your mapping spreadsheet. And the problem with that is, first of all, it takes time away from your business users to help you with the role redesign, but also business users don't necessarily know what roles they need. They certainly know what they need to do to get their job done, but how that translates into technical roles on the back end, they very often do not know. And so there is a disconnect between the business or business roles even and technical roles that you somehow need to make sense of. So this is a time-consuming and unreliable process, I want to say, and you may end up with your master spreadsheet that's not as robust as it should be. But once you have completed that task, you go about creating those new roles in the profile generator in PFCG. And that's a manual task, obviously. You create those roles, you maintain your org fields, and then you build out those roles manually, hopefully based on a good SU24, so you have it a little bit easier by reusing proposals. And then comes testing. So you test, obviously not in production, you test in your queue environment, and you get your testers, you get your test scripts, and you run through your testing, and that's going to take a while, and also is to a certain degree unreliable, because what if something is not quite right with the test script? Or what if you've missed something? Or what if your roles are missing something that prevents the tester from continuing testing? Instead, they have to wait for you to fix whatever needs to be fixed. So there's a lot of back and forth, and it's all very time-consuming. And then at some point, once you're done testing and you think you have created a very good role concept, you go live and you cross your fingers, but then very often you realize that the role concept may not be as good as you thought it was, and there may be authorizations missing. Users get stuck. They have to call the help desk. Roles have to be fixed, and that costs time and money at the end. And those are what I just told you basically covers many of the areas that I've mentioned before, but really as part of an actual role redesign project. And so what I'd like to show you today is a solution called the Xiting Authorizations Management Suite, or XAMS. So whenever you hear me say XAMS, that's what I'm referring to. And that solution can help you address many, if not all, of those issues by simplifying and automating many of those manual and unreliable tasks that I've just mentioned. It can do a number of other things that we will only cover very briefly. We'll very much focus on the role redesign and role administration aspect of the solution. But there are many things that you can do to automate many of those tasks I've mentioned, including role testing. That's a very big and very important area for us to help you test your new roles, ideally in production, but without negatively affecting any of your users. So when you hear production and testing, you may think there is no way we can do that, but let me tell you there is, and I'll show you how that works. The other area is around RFC optimization. So as I've mentioned before, touching RFC interfaces is something that not everyone is very keen on doing, because there is a real risk associated with screwing something up. And I'll show you ways on how you can do that in production even without risking anything. Then the other area is around org field maintenance that you can automate by mass replicating roles across what we call org sets. and helping you figure out if there are discrepancies between your template roles and your model roles versus what you have in PFCG. Automating SU24 optimizations is another area that's very important to us, because we strongly believe that a good and solid SU24 will result in a better role concept and will make it easier to create new roles. Then we focus also on significantly reducing the risk during go live, so you don't run into an issue where a user gets stuck and has to wait for a role admin to fix a missing authorization. And last but not least, we also have a module. The XAMS is a modular solution that can deal with SAP security concepts and audits. And from a role optimization, role administration perspective, that's important because it allows you to keep track of your role concept and to make sure it continues to be in compliance with your own security concept or your own role concept. So there are automated tests that you can run on a regular basis that compare what it should be with what you have in your various systems. Now, as I've mentioned, the XAMS is a modular solution, and it has 7 modules and a number of free tools that I'll talk about very briefly at the end as well, that you can download from, or at least request a download from our webpage, that can help you with some of the tasks of administrating roles and getting a better idea of what RFC interfaces you have in your system, for instance. But the main components I'd like to talk about today are the Role Designer. It's a module that allows you to virtually design and create roles, to test those new roles against SOD or for SOD conflicts. You can link it up to SAP Access Control, for example, if you have GRC, to see how your virtual roles would fare when it comes to SOD violations. Then you can run what-if scenarios. So you can use those virtual roles and virtually assign them to users and see how well they would work for your users. And all of that before those roles even exist in PFCG. So that's quite ingenious and helps you to model your new role concept virtually first, test it and make sure it's really solid before you even create those roles through the push of a button. The next one is called the ABAP Alchemist. It's a classic ABAP code scanner, and from a role administration, role redesign perspective, we use this module to scan your custom ABAP code for either missing authorization checks or existing authorization checks. And we compare those to SU24 to make sure they are part of your proposal database. That helps you to create solid roles for your custom code. The next one is what we call the Role Builder or Automatic Role Builder, and it's probably the most valuable module of the XAMS, because it allows you to test new roles in production without having to assign those roles to users. And we call it productive test simulation. And that's quite ingenious because you don't affect any of your users. They keep their old roles, but at the same time, we can kind of give them the new roles in a backpack, if you will, and simulate how those new roles would work in real-life scenarios. So while users are doing their actual job versus testers running through a test script. The next one is the Role Replicator, and that's meant to help you with making sense of, or potentially, well, with replicating roles across org sets. So that helps with simplifying your org field maintenance. As you know, let's say, for an example, you have to add a company code, and if that company code affects 500 roles, then you have to go role by role to add that company code in there, and that obviously takes a lot of work. With Role Replicator, you can do that once and then replicate that change across a number of roles, and that significantly simplifies your org field maintenance. The next one we call Xiting Times, and that's a module that takes the risk out of your go live. So it allows users, if they hit or run into an issue during go live because there is maybe something missing in the new roles that they got assigned, to temporarily get their old roles back and continue working while someone fixes whatever is missing in the new roles. Then we have what's called a role profiler. That's a classic analysis tool, so it can help you to get an understanding of how good your existing role concept is. So it can check for roles with open authorizations or changed authorizations, changed org fields. It can tell you how many of your read-only roles have activities in there that are more than read-only, and so on and so forth. Then we have a module called the Security Architect. That's the module that, or the solution that can help you with maintaining or remain to be compliant to your own security concept. So we deliver ready-to-use security concepts for various SAP components and technologies. It's basically a written concept, but with built-in checks that can check your existing systems against the concept. And one such check area could be a role concept. And then I've mentioned we have two free tools that you can request for download. One is a user logging tool that can help you to schedule user loggings. So when you do an upgrade and you log your users, you don't have to be on the system to do that. You schedule it. You have a list of users that are excluded from the logging, and then you can just sit at home and wait for the tool to log everyone except the admins on Saturday at midnight, for instance, and then unlock everybody once the maintenance window is over, for example. And the other tool is the RFC stock take tool that gives you an idea of what RFC interfaces you have, what roles they have. We use this tool or the report of that tool to estimate the effort involved in an RFC optimization project, for example. But you can use it yourself to get a better understanding of how your RFC interfaces are set up and how they look like. Now, I've mentioned before the steps it takes to do a manual role redesign project. Now let's look at that again, but with the help of the XAMS before we go into the details of each modules, and I'll show you screenshots of how it works and what it does. But basically, we categorize or we break apart a role redesign project in various work packages, we call them. And the first one is the project preparation, which not everyone does, but we highly recommend. And that's also related to doing an SU25 update to get your SU24 optimized. Then we have a number of proposals based on our experience that we import into SU24. We scan your custom code and optimize SU24 based on that. We scan your existing role concept and make sure everything that you have in your roles, at least everything that makes sense, is part of SU24 as well. Then we also collect statistical trace data. We use ST03N for that. But then instead of creating a spreadsheet to figure out who needs what, we allow you to, as I mentioned before, virtually design your new role concept based on that trace data. So based on what your users were actually doing, we can create virtual roles for you. We can run what-if scenarios. We can test those new roles. We can virtually assign them to see how they would work. But once you're happy with your virtual concept, you push a button and we deploy all those new roles directly into PFCG, so you don't have to do that manually. Then we finalize those roles, hopefully based on a good SU24. We create org sets, so we allow you to model your organization based on business unit or location or a combination thereof, and then mass replicate roles. So that's important for, or a nice feature for those roles that only differ in org field values, for instance, or in org fields. And then we go into testing those new roles in production using our productive test simulation. And last but not least, we go into what we call a protected go live, which reduces the risk of something going wrong. And I'll show you then step by step how each of those work packages are executed, what modules we use and how we use them. So we very often start out with analyzing your existing role concept. At least most of our customers that decide to do a proof of concept first look at what they have. You know, how bad is it what you currently have? I guess that's the question that most are trying to answer first. And Role Profiler allows you to do that. You simply select the roles you want to scan or analyze, and then you can execute any of those reports. You see on the right-hand side here a number of report categories, with one expanded, the role quality and sustainability category, where you can test your new roles for, as I said, manual authorizations, open authorizations, changed org fields. We have a set of reports around derived roles, all with the goal of analyzing what you currently have and identifying areas of where you can improve your role quality. We can detect critical access, so we have a number of what we call watchdog reports that give you an indication of what roles have more than read-only access or have access to HR data or access to master data. Very often we see that customers are obviously aware, if they have HCM, human capital management, what roles have HR access. But then some of the finance roles may have access to HR data as well, and that's not necessarily transparent always. So you can select all your finance roles or all the roles that are not dedicated HR roles, and we tell you what roles have access to HR data that you may not be aware of, or access to master data, just to name a few examples. We use that the role profiler also to optimize SU24 and to detect issues in your role concept. We also have a number of HANA reporting that allows you to get an idea of what you need to do to your role concept before you can migrate to S/4HANA. That's another area that's currently very interesting and where we've spent a lot of focus on lately. Here is an incomplete list of, but a more detailed list than you saw before, of some of those reports we have available. We can have mentioned we can check your derived roles to see if they're out of sync maybe. We can check your naming convention, give you an idea of what roles do not follow your naming convention. We can have mentioned the SU24 optimization reports. One very good example is the S-Tabu-Nam, S-Tabu-Dis, S-Tabu-Klai area, where you want to make sure that if you have table access, that you have at least a proposal for the table name or the table group in your SU24, so we can test for that. We can also help you with such tasks as creating user menus based on trace data. So if you have to create a new menu for a role, you can either do it manually, one T-code at a time in PFCG, or you can say, give me the trace data of all the transactions my users executed. I'm going to select either one user or maybe a user group, maybe all my finance users, and our software can give you a menu with one click that contains all the T-codes neatly formatted and put into the right hierarchy of all those transactions that one user or a group of users executed. So that makes it really simple to create user menus. We do role versioning as well, so you can, or we can, create a new version of a role every time you make a change. And that's very convenient, because if something doesn't quite work out, or if you need to go back, all you have to do is revert to an earlier version. You don't even have to know what the differences are between a newer and an older version. You just say, go one version back, because I know it worked back then, and that's it. So that's very convenient to go back and forth in versions, and so on and so forth. So there are a number of reports that can help you understand how good your existing role concept is. And here I have one sample or one example of a critical authorizations watchdog. So we deliver a set of critical authorizations or authorizations that we deem are critical based on our experience and based on SAP's best practice. But you can certainly customize that list. But in this example here, I've selected all my Z roles. I've run the critical authorizations watchdog, and I get a list of roles that have critical authorizations in there. And I can drill down and I see exactly what the critical authorization is, and I can jump down directly into the role to figure out what's going on. So that is just a very simple example of how you can figure out what roles do have access or have critical authorizations or combinations thereof, and so on. The next one I've mentioned is the user menu generation, where I can just say, okay, based on trace data, tell me or give me a list of users with all their current favorites, the ones that I have used, the ones that I have, the transactions they have used beyond what they have in the menu, and then certain combinations thereof. And for every column, you have the little magic wand that you can use to export a text file with the complete menu, or you can select multiple users and get a menu. So it's very convenient to build user menus. The next one is the ABAP Optimist. That's our classic ABAP code scanner that can help you to scan your code and look for missing proposals in SU24. I'm going to jump through this fairly quickly because it can do a lot of things other than what we need for role optimizations. But you can see here on the screenshot the number of checks it can perform. You can select your object type you want to scan, be it a program, a role, a transaction, and then you run the scan. Here is a blown up screenshot, and then here is the test report that gives you an idea of the findings based on priority. Green means informational, yellow means warning, red would be something like a missing authorization check, which I don't have here in my system. And also, if there is anything that's missing in SU24, you'll also have a column that allows you to automatically update SU24 with that finding. So you can do it right from the report, and you don't have to go into SU24 to do that. The next one is the role designer. That's meant to allow you to create virtual roles based on usage data. So we assume that users are generally over-authorized and they don't need as many authorizations as they currently have. So we propose creating roles on the least privilege principle. And you can do that based on your trace data. We help you with the role definition, and you can test your new and virtual roles even before they exist in PFCG. And I'm going to jump forward here to the UI. This is where I've loaded my ST03 and trace data. I see all my transactions on the left with the short text, and you can pick the columns that you want to show, and you can see in how many roles that transaction is in. On the right-hand side, you see the users, how many transactions they have used, how many they are still unauthorized for, and what the coverage percentage is. Based on the middle column, that's where I create my virtual roles. I can load roles from a template. We provide you with a number of proposals based on common job functions, but you can certainly create them from scratch. Drag and drop roles over from the left. Drag and drop T-codes over from the left to your roles or into your roles, and then you can drag and drop those roles over to your users, and you would see immediately how well in a percentage they would be covered with this virtual role assignment. So you can clearly see if the assigned role, which doesn't exist yet in PFCG, covers a user properly. And very often, if you're attempting to remove authorizations from users, you don't want to reach 100% maybe. Sometimes you do, depends on your goal of the role redesign project. And this is the design view. Then we have a reporting view that gives you some of the same information, but in a more detailed view. There is a number of other reports you can run. You can test your roles here against access control, but you can basically see how well your users would be covered. And green here means that those users have a SAP all kind of profile or are covered 100%. And everyone else is covered either not at all or to a certain percentage. And so you play with your concept, you assign your roles as you think they should be, you check your coverage percentage, and you decide, is this a role concept that works for me based on how well my users would be covered? And if so, you push a button and we deploy that new role concept into PFCG, and you don't have to do it manually. Also, I want to mention one thing with the new service pack that will come out this month. We'll have all the S4 HANA migration capabilities in Role Profiler. So you can design your new role concept in Role Designer, and we tell you based on your trace data, based on your existing role concept, how well that concept would work on S4 HANA.
or if, and we automatically then replace certain T codes with other T codes that S/4HANA knows. One very good example is always the BP business partner. So if we see transactions in your roles that have been consolidated into BP, we do that for you automatically. So you end up with a role concept that works on S/4HANA, and you don't have to go through SAP's very extensive and still incomplete simplification list in an attempt to figure it out yourself. The next one is the role replicator. So very often with the role designer, we create template roles and then we replicate them using role replicator. And the way it works is you set up or you model your organization based on either geographic location or a business unit or combinations thereof, and you add your organizational fields to your org sets, which may belong to an org set group. So you could have org set group Asia with the various Asian countries underneath, and then every country has the corresponding org fields that they need. And then you can assign a template role to one of those org sets and mass replicate across all the other org sets in the org set group. So that makes it really simple to create, well, derived roles. They are really single roles in the system. They are not derived roles, but they act like derived roles with the advantage of having single roles which are easier to maintain in your system, but they all come together here in Role Replicator. And then at any time you can check if something is out of sync. So if someone went into PFCG and made a change to a company code, let's say, in one of your quote-unquote derived roles, you would see it in here and would say, hey, there is a discrepancy indicated by the yellow status here, by the triangle, and you can compare and you see immediately what the differences are between your role, your template role or your model role and what's in PFCG, and you can override that by synchronizing your model again down to PFCG. But if you ever have to add a company code, let's say somewhere, you do it once in here and click on sync, and we synchronize that change down to all the affected roles. So you don't have to do that manually. And if you have a large organization with a lot of roles that are derived just based on, or may just differ based on organizational fields, then this can really help you save a lot of time and effort. The next one is the Role Builder. Role Builder has two core features. One I'd like to talk about first, and that's called the productive test simulation. What that does is it allows you to test new roles without having to assign them in production. So the way it works is fairly simple but quite ingenious, I want to say. So you identify your test users. Let's say all users of the finance department. And using our tool, you mass create a reference user, a standard SAP reference user for each of those testers. And then you assign the new roles to the reference users, not to the actual users. And you associate the reference user with the dialog user. And so if you visualize it, every finance user in scope for testing still has the old roles, indicated here by that gray ball, but at the same time, through the reference user assignment, they carry their new roles in a backpack. And thanks to a change that SAP did for us a while ago, every time the SAP kernel performs an authorization check, it does it against the reference user first and only then against the dialog user. And both checks can lead to potentially different error codes if an authorization check fails. So let's say I'm a user and I have SE16 in my currently assigned roles. In my new roles in the backpack, I don't have SE16 anymore because I shouldn't have it in the first place. So during my testing in production, meaning I'm just doing my job, I go into SE16 and the SAP kernel does an authorization check against the reference user. That auth check fails because I don't have that anymore, and it produces an error code, a certain error code. But then it does it against my currently assigned roles, and it succeeds. So I can get into SE16 without any issues. I don't even know what happened. But in the background, I have this error code from my reference user that our solution can scoop up and basically consolidate them, and the role admin can then see a list of failed authorization checks against the reference users that succeeded against the dialog users. A different error code would be produced if the auth check failed in both cases, which means I never had that authorization and I'm just maybe poking around in the system. Or if it succeeded in both cases, that would be a different error code too. And here is the report, and there is one return code column, and error code 0 means the auth check failed excuse me, against the reference user, but succeeded against the dialog user. And that's for me as a role admin an indication that A, I missed something in the new roles that I need to add, or B, I took that away, that authorization away on purpose, and I can just kind of mitigate or hide those specific cases because I'm aware of that. I took that away and I don't want to see it in the list here anymore. I only want to see the stuff that I accidentally missed in my new roles. And that way, you can have your regular business users just work in production as they always do, but in the background, they actually test your new role concept without affecting them in any way. And once you have looked at that report, you fix whatever needs to be fixed in dev, you transport those changes up the chain into production, and over time you'll see less and less errors until they completely disappear. And at that point, I have a role concept that works, period. And the same capability, well, not the same, but a similar capability we have for RFC interfaces, because there it's even more critical. If an interface, stops working in the middle of the night, then you may have a real issue. So with that, we can assign those. We can first of all trace the interface to see what it's doing and what authorizations it needs. Then assign those new roles with the authorizations we think it needs as a reference user, and just let it run for maybe months in a row across, maybe a year end closing. And make sure there are no error codes. And once we have a role concept for that RFC interface that doesn't produce any errors anymore, then you can deauthorize the interface and assign the new roles basically and take away the old ones. But then a second capability of the role builder comes into the picture that's specifically meant for RFC interfaces, where you can automatically create delta roles of anything that's missing, at least of authorizations that we have on what we call a whitelist. And you can see that a little bit here. Green is on our authorizations that are on our whitelist. Red are authorizations that are on our blacklist, meaning they are critical. And we wouldn't automatically create those delta roles. But for everything else that's on the whitelist, we can automatically create a delta role and immediately assign it to the interface user. And within a few seconds, that authorization will be available and the interface continues working. But once we're done with our testing and we feel really good about it, we go live basically, and we use exciting times for that and the protected go live, as we call it. And there we flip the switch. So we take away the old roles, we assign the new roles, and you can see it here on the very right of the screen or on the slide, and we give or assign the old roles to the reference user, and then take the reference user away from the dialog user. But it sits there, it's available in case we need it, but it's not permanently assigned to the dialog user. But what that means is if a user runs into an issue during go live, and so, let's say I really need SE16, I'm supposed to have SE16, but my new roles don't have it anymore, I can go into a self-service portal and say, hey, give me my reference user with my old roles back for the next hour, because I need to do something that I used to be able to do, and I continue having, and then I will need to be able to do in the future as well. It's part of my job, so I need that capability, but until you had time to fix it, give me my reference user back, so I have those new roles in the backpack, or those old roles in the backpack, and they can continue working. So it's similar to emergency access management or firefighter, with the big difference it's meant for end users to not elevate their access, but to give them back what they had before the role redesign. So the exposure really is very limited. You're not opening a can of worms where everyone is suddenly starting to use Firefighter. You just give them back what they had in the first place before you did the role redesign. And you can build a workflow around it. You can say someone has to pre-approve it, or someone approves it after the fact. Everything is properly logged and audited, of course. And one main difference here as well as compared to Firefighter is that I, as a user, when I check out that reference user, continue using my own user ID. I just get a reference user assignment, as a backpack, so to say, but I'm in the system using my own ID. So from an auditing perspective, that makes it much easier to fully understand who did what in the system. And if you were to go into SU01 during such an assignment, you would actually see the reference user assignment right there. Last but not least, the security architect, and I want to be mindful of the time here. We have about 13 minutes left, so we're going to cover that real quick. Security architect is I'm going to skip forward here to the UI, is a module that delivers ready-to-use security concepts for ERP, for Java, for Solution Manager, for IDM, for HCM, and for GRC. And those are literally written concepts on how SAP is supposed to be set up based on the German SAP security guidelines, SAP best practices, our own experience and influence from EY and PwC. So basically, when you have an SAP security audit and a third party comes in and checks your SAP system, these are the areas they're going to check. And we've documented them. So you have your concept ready to use. You can certainly modify it. It's like a book with chapters that you can rearrange, you can hide them, you can change colors, make it look like your own, etc. But every chapter has a number of checks built in that allow you to test your connected systems against the concept. And one such check area is role management. So you can check for naming conventions and basically ensuring that your role concept you once set up remains in compliance on your various systems with your written concept. And here is a very simple test report. Test reports are available in tabular form or in line with the written document. This is about SAP security settings and system settings, where you can see where you're out of compliance, indicated by red, yellow, or green. You can drill down into every single area. And one very simple example is the password length. How long are passwords supposed to be, based on your concept, and what do your systems have in their profile parameters. And there you can immediately see where they don't match. And with every test, we keep a history, and so you can see how well you improved over time. So, is this year's audit, was that better maybe as last year's? And you can certainly use that tool to prepare for an audit. But to sum it up, using the XAMS to administrate your roles, to create new roles, to test roles, to maintain them is significantly cheaper from an ROI perspective than having to do it manually. And this graph was built by a major auditing firm as part of a role redesign project that they did using the XAMS. And you can clearly see how quickly you can achieve a return on invest with that software. I think it's around a year, yes, a year, when you basically get your money back because of time and cost savings that are associated with role testing, with the exposure of over-authorized RFC interfaces with org field maintenance, and so on and so forth. And that's really in a nutshell what the XAMS does. From a technical perspective, it's built in ABAP. It's licensed based on users perpetually or subscription. We don't care about numbers of systems, numbers of clients, or ESS, MSS users, obviously. Here is free endorsement from SAP that I always like to show because it proves how valuable the XAMS really is. There is an OSS note that specifically talks about optimizing RFC interfaces and the criticality about that, and why it makes sense to use the XAMS, because if you were to do that manually, it's gonna take a lot of time and money and effort, and there is a lot of risk associated with that, and you can virtually eliminate that risk by using some of the techniques that I've showed you before. There is also a very good video on YouTube that you can watch that's also more on a high-level side that explains the value of each of those modules and how you can use them combined. These are some of our customers that use the XAMS. It's been around for many, many years. We're now on Service Pack 11, SP12 coming out here shortly. And it's a solid solution. It scales. Doesn't matter how many users you have. Doesn't matter how many roles you have, how much your tables are that contain all the authorizations. It simply doesn't matter. It doesn't change the performance of the solution. Now, with that being said, we have a few minutes left, and I'd like to open it up to questions. So if you want to use your questions box, if you have any, then now would be the time to do so. And I'll just give it here a few minutes to see if any questions come in. If not, then I'll take that as an indication that I very clearly presented the subject matter. But let's give it a few and see if we have any questions. Also, again, just as a reminder, this is a recorded webinar, so we'll make this recording available right after. You get an automated email from GoToMeeting or GoToWebinar. I'll also send you a link with a non-Flash based version, because not everyone has Flash. I certainly don't. And I see here a raised hand. There are two raised hands, so let me try to unmute you. Maybe that works, and you can then ask your question if you don't want to write it. So, hello. Chief Shankar.
Hi, Michael. I have a quick question.
Yes.
How do you use this SU24 as an automatic or optimization option here?
Mm-hmm. Good question. Yes. So we've seen in one of the reports in the very beginning, well, we haven't really seen the SU24 optimization report, I believe, but using the role profiler, you can scan your roles or your custom code for proposals that are missing in SU24. And as part of that report, you have the ability, with every finding, basically, there is one column that says add to SU24. So one classic example is the S-tabunam, S-tabudis that I've mentioned before. So if we see that you have roles with authorization objects related to tables where neither the table name nor the table group is proposed in SU24, we flag that, and then you can just click a button and we add either the table name or the table group to SU24. So automated in a matter of, you don't really want to select all the findings and say just add, because not everything may be applicable or even advisable to add, but you can just click and we update your SU24 on a line-by-line basis, if that makes sense. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, great, Michael. Thank you for explanation. Makes sense.
Absolutely, absolutely. So we have then Vijay. I'm going to unmute you, and you can see you have.
Yeah, hi Michael. Thanks for the session.
Absolutely. So your question is around how do we differentiate ourselves from GRC, from SAP's GRC toolset? Is that correct?
Yes, exactly. Yes. Exactly.
Yeah, very, very good question, and one we hear a lot as well. There is some minor overlap to GRC, but for the most part, we are complementing GRC and vice versa. So let me tell you where the overlap is. The overlap is, for example, some of our test reports can tell you about critical authorizations. Obviously, GRC can do that as well, typically at the point of assignment. So when you assign roles, you may get an SOD violation, and you can mitigate it or ignore it or whatever it may be. You can also check your roles for, excuse me, for critical authorization. So that's an overlap where we have capability that GRC has as well. but with many of the other reports in terms of checking for open authorizations, changed authorizations, creating roles virtually, testing them before they exist and before they are assigned, that GRC cannot do. Certainly the whole role replication based on a single role concept versus derived roles, GRC cannot do. So there are many cases where GRC simply doesn't offer anything, but then there are also the integration options, like I've mentioned as part of Role Designer. When you create your roles virtually before they exist, you can already reach out to GRC and test them for SOD violations. So there is some overlap, there is some integration, but for the most part, we provide functionality that GRC doesn't, and vice versa.
Okay, thank you. And just one more question, Michael.
Yes.
Yeah. What is the costing involved in this? Like, if I want to use the tool or the product, so as you mentioned, like it's a kind of even by user ID, even it has user ID is available in multiple systems. Then if I say I have somewhere around 5,000 user base, and if I want to use this product for a role redesign activity, so what would be the licensing cost? As you said, it's ROI would be 1 year.
Right. So as I've mentioned, we license based on dialogue and technical users. Obviously, if those same users exist in multiple systems, we would only count them once. We don't count ESS, MSS, and you can perpetually license the software, so meaning you own it and then you just pay maintenance and support every year based on a percentage of what you paid for the license, or you can subscribe to the software and rent it maybe for the duration of a project. Now, typically that's meant for an extended trial, or let's say a 3-month project where it's not going to drag out multiple years, because after a certain number of months that you rent it, it's actually the same price or less expensive than as buying it. So renting only makes sense for a certain number of months, typically for a clearly defined project or extended trial or whatever you may want to call it. Now, if you want to get a specific quote for your landscape or for your users, I'm going to shoot you an email and we can take it offline. But that's just on how we price it, and then the actual price depends on your circumstances.
Okay, thanks, Michael. We'll get in touch offline then.
Okay, sounds good. Let's see, we have any more questions? If you have any more questions, you may raise your hand or just type it into the questions box. Okay, I don't see any more. Let's see. I think we handled everybody. Again, thanks very much for great questions and for being a very patient audience and for sticking with me until the very end. I appreciate it. I hope you got something out of that. I'll follow up via email as well if there are any more questions that you may have, or if you want to have a demo or maybe do a proof of concept. Certainly, I'd be more than willing to work with you. And with that being said, we'll stop the recording and close the session, and everyone have a great remaining Friday and a good weekend.
Thank you, Michael. Bye.